Kevin Renshaw stood in the warehouse at 5:47 a.m., watching the third shift load the last truck for Indianapolis. The concrete floor was spotless. The inventory systems hummed with precision. 3 years ago, this place had been hemorrhaging money. Now it ran like a Swiss watch. He pulled up the quarterly reports on his tablet. The Midwest division showed black ink across every metric. Revenue up 34%. Operating costs down 18%. Client retention at 96%. Kevin had built this success one brutal decision at a time. Morning, Kevin. Miguel Tran jogged up with 2 cups of coffee. At 34, Miguel understood logistics algorithms better than anyone Kevin had worked with. The routing software flagged another efficiency gain. We can cut 12 hours off the Detroit-Milwaukee run. Kevin accepted the coffee and studied Miguel's tablet. Numbers didn't lie. People did, but numbers told the truth. Good work. Implement it Monday. You ever sleep? I drove past your office at 11 last night. Kevin didn't answer. Sleep was for people who could afford to stop pushing. He'd learned that lesson during his first year at Hartridge Logistics. Paul Ellison had made it clear that Kevin would never be family. Never be one of them. But he could be useful. 3 years of being useful. 3 years of turning around a failing division while Paul's relatives got promoted over him repeatedly. Kevin had stopped counting how many times he'd heard, "You're valuable where you are." Translation: know your place. The morning supervisor approached with her daily briefing. Kevin listened while his mind drifted to tonight's quarterly leadership dinner. Another opportunity for Paul to remind everyone who belonged in the inner circle. Kevin walked to his Spartan office. A desk, 2 chairs, a computer, and a whiteboard covered in supply chain calculations. No family photos. No golf trophies. Just the tools needed to do the job. Jocelyn had complained about the sterile appearance. "Where's your personality?" she'd asked during one rare visit. Kevin's personality was in the numbers. In systems that worked. In problems he'd solved while her father's nephews collected paychecks for showing up. His computer chimed with an email from Paul's assistant. Reminder about tonight's dinner at Meridian Club. As if Kevin needed reminding about another evening of watching mediocrity get rewarded. At 11:30, his phone buzzed. "Jocelyn, are you picking me up tonight, or should I meet you there?" "I'll pick you up at 6. Dad's excited about the dinner. He said there might be big announcements." Kevin's jaw tightened. Big announcements usually meant someone else getting promoted. "I'm sure there will be. Don't be like that. This could be good news for us." For us. As if Kevin's career was a team sport where Jocelyn shared victory without doing work. "I have to go." He hung up and turned back to his computer. The afternoon passed reviewing vendor contracts and shipping schedules. Real work that produced real results while Paul's family played executive. At 5:15, Kevin drove home to change. Their Lincoln Park house was a gift from Paul, purchased below market price. Another reminder that Kevin's success depended on Ellison's generosity. Jocelyn was applying makeup when he arrived, wearing a black cocktail dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "You look handsome," she said as Kevin adjusted his tie. Kevin nodded, but didn't return the compliment. They drove downtown in silence. Jocelyn hummed along to the radio, while Kevin focused on traffic and tried not to think about Paul's planned announcement. The Meridian Club occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower. Kevin had attended dozens of Hartridge events here, always as Jocelyn's husband rather than a valued executive. Paul Ellison held court near the bar, surrounded by regional managers. At 63, he projected confident authority. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His smile was reserved for people who mattered. "Kevin." Paul's greeting was cordial but distant. "Glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it. How are things in the warehouse?" Kevin resisted correcting him. The Midwest division generated 40% of Hartridge's revenue, but Paul viewed it as just a warehouse. Running smoothly. "Good. That's what we like to hear." Paul turned back to his conversation, dismissing Kevin from the group. Jocelyn squeezed his arm and steered him toward their assigned table near the back with middle managers. Kevin watched Paul's nephew, David Ellison, work the room. At 29, David had joined Hartridge 8 weeks ago with 0 logistics experience. His qualifications consisted entirely of sharing Paul's DNA. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention." Paul stood at the head table, tapping his wine glass. David positioned himself right next to Paul, grinning like he knew what was coming. Hartridge has experienced tremendous growth. Our success depends on having the right people in the right positions, leading with vision and dedication. Kevin's stomach tightened. Here it came. Tonight, I'm pleased to announce that David Ellison will join our senior leadership as Regional Director for Eastern Operations. David brings fresh perspectives and innovative thinking. Please join me in congratulating him on this well-deserved appointment. Polite applause erupted. Kevin clapped slowly while processing what he'd heard. Regional Director, a position Kevin had pursued for 2 years. A position requiring deep supply chain knowledge, client relationships, and operational oversight. David had been with the company 8 weeks. Kevin looked around at his colleagues, forced smiles masking disbelief. Janet Walsh caught his eye and shook her head imperceptibly. Miguel stared at his plate. This is exciting, Jocelyn whispered. Regional Director is big. Kevin raised his wine glass and stood. The room quieted as people noticed his movement. Congratulations to David, Kevin said, his voice carrying clearly. Truly impressive. His tone was perfectly measured. Professional. No one could detect the ice beneath except those who knew him well. Paul nodded approvingly. The room returned to celebration while Kevin finished his wine. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of speeches and networking. Kevin participated when necessary, but his mind cataloged every slight, every dismissive comment, every time Paul had made clear that Kevin would never be more than useful. During the drive home, Jocelyn tried filling the silence with dinner commentary. Kevin stared ahead and said nothing. Are you going to sulk all night? She finally asked. I'm not sulking. Then what's wrong? Your cousin got promoted to regional director after 8 weeks. David's not my cousin. He's Dad's nephew. Maybe he's really talented. Kevin looked at her directly. David has never managed a team, handled a client relationship, or completed a logistics project. His biggest accomplishment was figuring out the coffee machine. That seems harsh. It's accurate. Jocelyn unbuckled her seatbelt. Look, I know you're disappointed, but Dad has reasons for these decisions. He's built a successful company by putting the right people in the right positions. Kevin almost laughed. The right people, as if genetics were a hiring criterion. Your father built a successful company by inheriting it and maintaining status quo while competent people do actual work. That's not fair. Fair. Kevin got out and walked toward the house. You want to talk about fair? Dad respects you. He values your contributions. He values them so much he promotes his nephew after 8 weeks. Maybe if you tried building relationships instead of focusing on numbers. Kevin stopped and turned around. Build relationships. You mean kiss his ass and pretend competence doesn't matter as long as your family. I mean be part of the team instead of acting above everyone. They'd reached the front door. Kevin unlocked it and walked inside without responding. You can't shut down every time something doesn't go your way, she said. This is my family. Your family. Exactly. Kevin loosened his tie and sat in his chair. The same chair where he'd spent countless evenings reviewing reports while Jocelyn watched television. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've spent 3 years turning around a failing division while your family collects paychecks and promotions they haven't earned. I'm tired of being told I'm valuable where I am, when you really mean I'll never be one of you. Jocelyn sat across from him. That's not true. Dad sees your potential. Your father sees my usefulness. There's a difference. Maybe you should talk to him. Kevin almost laughed again, as if Paul cared about Kevin's feelings. I don't think talking will solve this. Then what will? Kevin looked at his wife, really looked at her for the first time in months. Beautiful, intelligent, and completely naive about how the world worked. She never fought for anything, never had to prove herself, never watched less qualified people get promoted because of their last name. I don't know yet, but he was already figuring it out. Kevin arrived at 5:30 a.m. the next morning. The building was empty except for security and cleaning staff. He spent the first hour reviewing David's personnel file. The picture was worse than expected. David had been assigned 3 initiatives over 8 weeks. The first was vendor relationship analysis, supposed to be completed in 2 weeks. 4 weeks later, David submitted 2 pages plagiarizing vendors' marketing materials. The second was cost-benefit analysis of rural delivery expansion. David's report had 3 bullet points and concluded further study needed. Kevin had seen better work from summer interns. The third assignment was 3 weeks overdue with 0 deliverables. This resume had earned regional director. Kevin opened a new document and began typing. His resignation letter was straightforward and professional. 2 paragraphs thanking Paul and expressing his decision to pursue other opportunities. Standard corporate language revealing nothing about his motivations. Then he opened a second document. Kevin had always been meticulous about documentation. Every email, memo, and report was carefully filed. Over 8 weeks, he'd been particularly careful about documenting David's work. The evidence was damning. Project reports with fictitious data. Vendor agreements inflating costs 15% with kickbacks to offshore accounts. Meeting minutes claiming credit for others' work. A pattern of fraud that would have gotten any non-family member fired immediately. Kevin compiled evidence methodically, organizing chronologically with supporting documentation. Bank records showing suspicious transactions. Email threads revealing falsified reports. Vendor contracts with unauthorized modifications benefiting David personally. He cross-referenced everything twice. Paul might dismiss Kevin's opinions, but couldn't argue with documented facts. For T745, Kevin printed both documents and sealed them in a manila envelope addressed to Paul. Then he prepared 3 additional packages: Board of Directors, SEC, and Illinois Department of Revenue. Miguel arrived at 8:15 with morning coffee. "You're here early today. Even for you. I need you to handle the morning briefing. I have a meeting with Paul. Everything okay?" Kevin looked at Miguel carefully. In 3 years, Miguel had never asked about politics or shown interest in gossip. He focused on algorithms and improvements. Exactly the kind of person Kevin respected. "Everything's fine. Just administrative issues." Paul's assistant, Barbara, arrived at exactly 9 o'clock. She'd worked for Paul 12 years and treated Kevin with professional courtesy, unlike executives who viewed assistants as furniture. "Good morning, Kevin. Do you have an appointment?" "No appointment, but I need to see Paul before his 10 o'clock. Barbara checked Paul's calendar. "He has 15 minutes between 9:30 and 9:45. "Perfect." At 9:32, Barbara gestured toward Paul's office. "He's ready." Paul's office was designed to intimidate. Massive desk, expensive artwork, bookshelves filled with leather volumes Kevin suspected were never opened. Everything calculated to remind visitors of Paul's importance and their relative insignificance. "Kevin, Barbara said you needed to discuss something administrative." Paul remained seated, a power play Kevin had witnessed dozens of times. Important people stayed seated. Less important people stood until invited. Kevin approached and placed the envelope directly in front of Paul. "It's been an honor working at Hartridge. Good luck moving forward." Paul glanced at the envelope but didn't pick it up. "What's this about?" "The contents will explain everything." "Kevin, if this is about David's promotion, your contributions haven't gone unnoticed. There will be other opportunities." Other opportunities. Kevin had heard that phrase so often it was meaningless. Always other opportunities for people like him. Opportunities to remain useful without becoming important. "I'm sure there will be. For someone else." Paul opened the envelope and read the resignation letter, then examined supporting documentation. His expression changed from surprise to anger to something that might have been fear. "What is this?" "Documented evidence of fraud and embezzlement involving your nephew. Bank records, falsified reports, vendor kickbacks. Everything's verified and cross-referenced." Paul looked up with unconcealed hostility. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm informing you that copies have been forwarded to the board, SEC, and regulatory agencies. Standard whistleblower protocols." "You son of a bitch." Kevin had expected anger, but Paul's reaction was more intense than anticipated. The corporate civility facade cracked completely, revealing the entitled bully underneath. David made mistakes. Young executives need guidance. That doesn't justify destroying his career. Young executives don't embezzle from vendor accounts. Those were accounting errors. Accounting errors don't involve offshore transfers to Panama. Paul stood abruptly, using his height to intimidate, a tactic that probably worked on people needing Paul's approval. Kevin wasn't one of them anymore. You'll regret this. I have connections throughout this industry. You'll never work in logistics again. We'll see. Kevin turned and walked toward the door without waiting for a response. He could hear Paul shouting behind him about lawsuits and career suicide, but the words didn't register. Kevin was thinking about what came next. He collected personal items, said goodbye to Miguel and Janet, and walked out of Hartridge for the last time. His phone started ringing before he reached his car. Paul's name appeared. Kevin declined and turned off the phone. By noon, every Chicago news outlet would report Hartridge's financial irregularities and SEC investigation. Paul would spend the day containing damage while Kevin planned his next move. 3 years of being told he was valuable where he was. 3 years of watching incompetence get rewarded while merit got overlooked. 3 years of building someone else's empire while being treated like hired help. Kevin had been useful long enough. Now, it was time to be dangerous. The Hartridge board convened emergency session at 2 p.m. Kevin knew because Wendell Sharp, a risk analyst under his supervision, texted, "Chaos." Kevin sat in his car outside a Lincoln Park coffee shop, reading news alerts. Financial press picked up the story quickly. Hartridge under investigation. SEC probe into Chicago supply chain company. Whistleblower allegations rock family business. Paul had tried calling 6 more times. Jocelyn left 4 voicemails, each more frantic. Kevin deleted them without listening. His phone buzzed. Lorna Griggs. "I saw the news," Lorna said without preamble. "Tell me you have a plan." At 62, Lorna was the smartest logistics executive Kevin had worked with. She'd built Hartridge's Western operations before Paul forced her into early retirement for his son-in-law. Her departure was officially mutual decision, but everyone knew Paul pushed her out for questioning his nepotistic hiring. "I have the beginning of a plan." "Good, because Paul's going to try destroying you. He's probably making calls now, trying to blackball you with every major logistics company in the Midwest." Kevin expected this. Paul's threats weren't posturing. He had connections and would use them to sabotage Kevin's prospects. "That's why I need to move fast." "What do you need?" "Seed capital, industry contacts, and someone who knows how to build a logistics company from the ground up." "How much capital?" $2 million to start. $5 million within 6 months. Lorna was quiet. Kevin could hear her thinking. $2 million was serious money, but reasonable startup budget for specialized logistics with experienced leadership. "I could do $2 million. My retirement portfolio's been sitting in municipal bonds earning nothing. I'd rather invest in something interesting. This won't be passive investment. I need a partner, not just funding." "Kevin, I've been sitting on my ass 2 years watching Paul run my company into the ground. I would pay $2 million for the chance to compete against him." They arranged to meet next morning at Lorna's Winnetka house. Kevin spent the afternoon thinking through operational details. Office space, equipment, insurance, compliance, client acquisition. Long but manageable list. More importantly, he thought about personnel. Hartridge employed talented managers frustrated by Paul's leadership. People like Miguel, who understood optimization better than anyone. People like Janet, who could run warehouse operations with military precision. People like Noel Vance in HR, passed over 3 times for refusing to participate in Paul's boys' club. His phone rang. Miles Croft, Hartridge's client relations director. "Kevin, what the hell did you do?" "I documented financial irregularities and reported them to authorities." Paul's in full meltdown. He called all-hands meeting and spent 40 minutes ranting about disloyal employees and sabotage. Half the staff wanted to hide under their desks. "How's morale?" "Terrible. People are updating resumes. The smart ones, anyway." Kevin pulled into a parking garage. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. 3 kids and a mortgage. Can't quit without having something lined up." "What if you did have something lined up?" Miles was quiet several seconds. "Are you starting your own company?" "Would you be interested if I was?" "Depends on details. But yeah, probably. Paul's been taking credit for my client relationships 3 years. I'm tired of making him look good." Kevin outlined the basics. New logistics company focused on efficiency, transparency, merit-based advancement. No nepotism, no politics, no taking credit for others' work. Just competent professionals delivering results. When do you want specifics? Miles asked. Give me a week to establish legal framework. Then we'll discuss equity and salary. After hanging up, Kevin drove home to face whatever conversation awaited with Jocelyn. Her car was there, meaning she'd probably spent all afternoon fielding family phone calls. She was waiting in the kitchen, still wearing her business suit, face red from crying. She looked at Kevin like he'd personally betrayed her. Dad called me at work. He told me what you did. I'm sure he gave you his version. He said you made false accusations against David and leaked confidential information. Kevin set his keys down and looked at his wife directly. I documented criminal activity and reported it to authorities. The press picked up the story because SEC investigations are public record. Criminal activity? Kevin, this is my family. Your family member embezzled money and falsified reports. Those are crimes. Jocelyn shook her head frantically. David wouldn't do that. There has to be some mistake. I have bank records showing unauthorized transfers. I have emails where David claims credit for work he didn't do. I have vendor contracts with unauthorized modifications benefiting him personally. No mistake. Then why didn't you talk to Dad first? Give him a chance to fix it internally? Kevin almost laughed. Give Paul a chance to fix the problem. Paul was the problem. He'd created a culture where incompetence was rewarded and fraud overlooked as long as the perpetrator had the right name. Because your father would have covered it up and promoted David anyway. That's not true. Jocelyn, your father promoted David to regional director after 8 weeks. David never completed a single project successfully. His only qualification was being Paul's nephew. What would have happened if I'd gone to Paul with evidence of criminal activity? Jocelyn sat at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands. I can't believe this is happening. Kevin sat across from her, trying to find sympathy. She was caught between husband and family, forced to choose sides in a conflict she hadn't created. But her automatic assumption that Kevin was wrong revealed where her loyalties lay. I tried to warn you. 3 years, Jocelyn. You watched them treat me like hired help while I built their profitability. I don't owe them silence about criminal activity. But did you have to destroy everything? Dad's company, David's career, our family relationships. I didn't destroy anything. I documented what was happening and reported it. If that destroys your family's company and relationships, maybe the problem isn't my actions. Jocelyn looked up with genuine confusion. What happens now? Now I build something better. What about us? Our marriage? Kevin had expected this question and decided his answer. That depends on whether you want to be part of what I'm building or stay loyal to what your family built. I shouldn't have to choose between my husband and my family. You're right. You shouldn't. But your family made that choice when they decided I would never be one of them. Kevin stood and walked toward the staircase. I'm starting a new company. It's going to compete directly with Hartridge, and it's going to win. You can be part of that, or you can stay loyal to Paul and David. But he can't do both. He went upstairs to pack, leaving Jocelyn crying in the kitchen. He could hear her, but didn't go back to comfort her. Comfort was for people willing to acknowledge reality instead of defending the indefensible. Kevin had spent 3 years trying to be the husband Jocelyn wanted and the employee Paul needed. He'd compromised principles, accepted disrespect, and watched less qualified people get promoted. He'd been patient and professional and useful. Those days were over. Lorna Griggs lived in a Tudor mansion she'd purchased with the severance Paul paid to get rid of her. Kevin arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, carrying a portfolio filled with business plans, financial projections, and competitive analysis. Lorna answered wearing jeans and a Northwestern sweatshirt, looking more like a suburban grandmother than one of the Midwest's most successful logistics executives. But Kevin knew better than to judge by appearances. "Coffee?" she asked, leading him to a home office larger than Kevin's apartment. The walls were covered with industry awards, newspaper clippings about deals Lorna had negotiated, and photographs of warehouse openings. Visual reminder of everything she'd accomplished before Paul decided she was expendable. "I spent yesterday reviewing everything about Hartridge's current operations," Lorna said, handing Kevin coffee. Paul's made interesting decisions since I left. Define interesting. He's cut costs by outsourcing to lowest bidders. Client satisfaction down 18%. Employee turnover up 37%. He's lost 4 major accounts to competitors in 6 months. Kevin wasn't surprised. Paul had always preferred short-term profit over long-term relationships. What about competitive vulnerabilities? Lorna smiled and opened a folder. That's where it gets fun. Hartridge's biggest weakness is routing inefficiency. They're using 2019 logistics software. Delivery times 20% slower than industry average. Customer service has gone to hell since Paul consolidated call centers. So there's room for a competitor offering better service at competitive prices. There's room for a competitor offering better service at higher prices. Hartridge's clients are frustrated enough to pay more for reliability. Kevin opened his portfolio and spread out documents. Business plan, organizational chart, financial projections, competitive analysis, timeline for launching operations. He'd worked until 3 a.m. getting everything ready. Lorna studied carefully, asking questions about startup costs, revenue projections, staffing plans. Same analytical approach Kevin respected. Focus on numbers and facts rather than emotions. Graviton Freight Systems, she said, reading the proposed name. I like it. Sounds modern and scientific. The name tests well. Suggests reliability and forward-thinking technology. Who else do you want to recruit? Kevin had a prepared list. Miles Croft for client relations. He knows every major account in the Midwest and has personal relationships with decision-makers. Noel Vance for HR and compliance. Miguel Tran for logistics optimization. Janet Walsh for operations management. What makes you think they'll leave Hartridge? Because they're competent professionals tired of watching mediocrity get rewarded. Miles has been passed over 3 times. Noel's ideas get ignored because Paul doesn't take advice from women. Miguel's improvements get implemented without credit. Janet's doing director work for supervisor pay. And they're loyal to you. Kevin considered carefully. They respect competence and hate working for incompetent people. I represent their best chance to work for a company rewarding merit instead of family connections. Lorna walked to the window. Kevin, I want to be clear. Starting a logistics company is hard work. Competing against established competitors with existing relationships is harder. If we do this, we're committing to years of 18-hour days and constant stress. I understand. And Paul's not going to just compete in the marketplace. He's going to try destroying us personally. Lawsuits, regulatory complaints, attempts to poach clients and employees. He'll use every dirty trick. Kevin set down his coffee and looked at Lorna directly. Good. I hope he tries everything. It'll make beating him more satisfying. Lorna smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. In that case, let's talk equity distribution and operational responsibilities. They spent 4 hours working through details. Lorna would provide funding and serve as CEO, handling strategic planning and investor relations. Kevin would be COO, responsible for daily operations, client relationships, and competitive strategy. They would split equity 60-40, with Lorna getting the larger share due to financial investment and industry connections. By 2 p.m., they had signed partnership agreement and open business accounts. Graviton Freight Systems officially existed. Kevin felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years, excitement about going to work. His phone buzzed with text from Wendell Sharp. Board meeting ended badly. Paul's out as CEO. Devitt arrested by federal marshals. Might be interested in new opportunities. Kevin showed the message to Lorna. She read it and laughed. Paul's out already? Faster than I expected. The board probably decided he was a liability. SEC investigations make investors nervous. What about Devitt? Federal charges for wire fraud and embezzlement. He'll probably plea bargain for reduced prison time. Kevin's phone rang. Miles Croft. Kevin, I just heard about Paul. Is your job offer still open? When can you start? How about Monday? Kevin looked at Lorna, who nodded. Monday works. Come by the office at 9 o'clock. We'll discuss your equity package and client transition strategy. You have an office already. We will by Monday. After hanging up, Kevin called Miguel, Noel, and Janet. All three accepted positions immediately. None asked about salary or benefits. They just wanted out of Hartridge before the company collapsed. By 5 p.m., Kevin had management team, startup funding, and business plan. He needed office space, equipment, and clients. The first two would be easy. Clients would require finesse. Kevin drove back to Lincoln Park to collect clothes and personal items. Jocelyn's car wasn't there, probably staying with parents while the family dealt with their disaster. He found a note on the kitchen table. Kevin, I need time to think. I'm staying at Mom and Dad's for a few days. We should talk when things settle down. Kevin crumpled the note and threw it away. Things weren't going to settle down. They were going to get more complicated as Graviton gained market share and Hartridge lost clients. Jocelyn would have to decide whether she wanted to be part of the solution or the problem. His phone rang again. Wendell Sharp. Kevin, are you somewhere private? What's on your mind? I have information you might find useful. Client lists, vendor contracts, operational data. Stuff that would help a new company understand market opportunities. Kevin paused. Wendell was offering confidential Hartridge information, which could be legally problematic. But if limited to publicly available material, it might be permissible. What kind of information? Public filings, industry reports, market analysis. Nothing confidential, but stuff that might take months to compile. I'd be interested in reviewing anything legally available. I'll put together a package. Should have it ready tomorrow afternoon. Kevin thanked Wendell and hung up. He was starting to understand how Paul had felt when Kevin handed him that resignation letter. The feeling of losing control, watching plans fall apart, realizing that trusted people were working against you. The difference was Paul had brought problems on himself through arrogance and corruption. Kevin was building something legitimate based on competence and integrity. Clients who came to Graviton would come because they received better service, not because they were being defrauded. Kevin packed 2 suitcases and loaded them into his car. He would stay in a hotel while looking for a permanent apartment. The Lincoln Park house belonged to Jocelyn's family anyway. Kevin had never felt comfortable there. As he drove away, Kevin looked back one final time. 3 years of his life trying to fit into a world that would never accept him. 3 years of compromising principles and accepting disrespect for financial security and social status. That he was done compromising, done accepting, done trying to fit into other people's definitions of success. From now on, Kevin Renshaw would define success for himself. And his definition started with destroying Paul Ellison's company and everything it represented. Kevin spent the weekend setting up Graviton operations. Office space downtown, 3 blocks from Hartridge headquarters. Furniture, computers, phones, software, insurance policies, regulatory filings, vendor agreements. By Sunday evening, Graviton had everything needed to begin operations Monday morning. More importantly, Kevin had begun reaching out to Hartridge clients. Not to poach directly, which would be unethical and possibly illegal, but to introduce himself as a new player in Chicago logistics. Several major clients expressed immediate interest in competitive bids. Monday morning, Kevin arrived at Graviton's office at 6 a.m. to find Lorna already there, reviewing vendor contracts. Miles, Miguel, Noel, and Janet arrived over the next hour, along with Wendell, who had decided to leave Hartridge and join Graviton as Director of Risk Analysis. Welcome to Graviton Freight Systems, Kevin said to the assembled team. Our mission is simple. Provide the best logistics services in the Midwest by rewarding competence, maintaining integrity, and focusing obsessively on client satisfaction. He presented business strategy, competitive advantages, and growth projections. The team asked intelligent questions about market positioning, efficiency, and revenue targets. Everyone understood they were building something from scratch with no guaranteed outcomes. What about Hartridge? Janet asked. Are we competing directly? We're competing against everyone. But yes, we'll compete against Hartridge for clients, employees, and market share. Anyone with problems about that should work somewhere else. Nobody expressed problems. The first week was a blur of client meetings, operational planning, and system setup. Graviton's lean structure allowed rapid decision-making and implementation. When potential clients requested competitive bids, Graviton could respond within hours instead of days. When operational problems arose, they were solved immediately by people with authority to make decisions. By Friday, Graviton had signed contracts with 3 former Hartridge clients and was negotiating with 2 more. Word was spreading through the logistics community about a new player staffed by experienced professionals who actually understood the industry. Kevin was reviewing weekend shipping schedules when his phone rang. "Jocelyn, how are you?" she asked, voice tentative and strained. "Busy. How's your family handling media coverage?" "It's been difficult. Dad's meeting with lawyers every day. Mom's not leaving the house because reporters keep calling. And Devitt has been indicted on federal charges." Kevin felt no sympathy. Paul had created the culture enabling Devitt's criminal behavior. Their problems were consequences of their own choices. "I'm sorry to hear that," Kevin said, though he wasn't. "Kevin, can we meet somewhere? I need to talk about us." Kevin looked around Graviton's office, where employees were working late to ensure Monday's deliveries would be flawless. These people had trusted him enough to leave secure jobs and join an improving startup. They deserved his full attention and commitment. "What's there to talk about?" "Our marriage. Our future. Whether we can work through this." Kevin had expected this conversation since resigning from Hartridge. Jocelyn wanted to reconcile, find some way to maintain their relationship while preserving family loyalties. She wanted Kevin to apologize for destroying her father's company and promise to compete less aggressively. "Jocelyn, I'm building a company that's going to put your father out of business. I'm not going to apologize for that or change strategy to make your family comfortable. But we could find middle ground. Maybe you could focus on different markets, or we could work out some non-compete agreement." Kevin almost laughed. Non-compete agreement. As if business competition was something negotiable to preserve family harmony. There is no middle ground. Either you want to be part of what I'm building, or you want to stay loyal to what your family built. You can't do both. Why not? Why does it have to be all or nothing? Because your family spent 3 years treating me like hired help, and now I'm going to prove they need me more than I ever needed them. That's not negotiable. Jocelyn was quiet several seconds. Kevin could hear her breathing, probably trying to think of some argument that would change his mind. What if I left Dad's company? What if I came to work for Graviton? Kevin considered this. Jocelyn had an MBA from Northwestern and had worked in Hartridge's marketing department 2 years before they married. She understood the logistics industry and had corporate experience, but she had no experience with real work. No experience with failure or rejection or having to prove herself based on merit rather than family connections. She'd never been passed over for promotion or watched less qualified people get credit for her ideas. What would you want to do at Graviton? I don't know. Marketing, maybe? Business development? I could help with client relationships. Our client relationships are built on delivering results, not on social connections and family networks. Are you prepared for that? I think so. Kevin looked out the window at downtown Chicago, where lights were beginning to come on in office buildings as people worked late. Somewhere in one of those buildings, Paul Ellison was probably meeting with lawyers and crisis consultants, trying to figure out how to save what remained of his company. Jocelyn, I don't think you understand what's about to happen. Graviton is going to take clients away from Hartridge systematically and deliberately. We're going to hire their best employees. We're going to undercut their pricing and exceed their service quality. We're going to compete against them until they either adapt or die. And you want me to be part of that. I want you to choose what kind of person you're going to be. Someone who believes competence should be rewarded and corruption punished? Or someone who thinks family loyalty is more important than professional integrity? Another long pause. Kevin could imagine Jocelyn sitting in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by reminders of the privileged life her father's company had provided. A life built on nepotism, fraud, and treating competent employees like disposable resources. I need more time to think about this. Take all the time you need, but understand that Graviton is moving forward with or without you. We're not waiting for anyone to make up their minds about whether they want to be part of something successful. Kevin hung up and turned back to his computer. Miguel had sent updated routing algorithms that would reduce delivery times by 12%. Janet had negotiated better rates with 3 vendors. Miles had scheduled client meetings for the entire following week. Real work. Real results. Real progress toward building something that rewarded merit instead of family connections. His phone buzzed with text from Jocelyn. I understand. Give me 2 weeks to figure out how to tell my family. Kevin deleted the message without responding. 2 weeks was longer than he'd expected, but it didn't matter. Graviton would continue growing regardless of Jocelyn's decision. He had more important things to focus on than his wife's family loyalty conflicts. He had a company to build and competitors to destroy. 6 months after Kevin's resignation, the Chicago logistics industry had been transformed. Graviton Freight Systems occupied a full floor downtown and employed 47 people. Their client roster included 12 former Hartridge accounts and 8 new clients attracted by Graviton's reputation for efficiency and reliability. Kevin stood in Graviton's conference room at 7 a.m., reviewing quarterly performance reports with his senior management team. The numbers told a story of systematic success. Revenue up 340% from launch, client retention at 98%, operational efficiency exceeding industry benchmarks by 23%. The Indianapolis expansion is ahead of schedule, Janet reported. We'll be operational by the end of next month, 3 weeks early. Kevin nodded approvingly. Graviton's growth had been carefully planned and methodically executed. No corners cut, no compromises on quality, no promises they couldn't deliver. Every client who chose Graviton received better service than they'd gotten from their previous provider. What's our competitive position against Hartridge? Kevin asked. Miles opened a folder filled with market analysis. They've lost 18 major clients in 6 months. Revenue down 47% year over year. Employee turnover at 63%. They're hemorrhaging money and talent. Kevin wasn't surprised. Hartridge's problems had started with Devitt's prosecution, but they'd been compounded by Paul's inability to adapt to increased competition. Instead of improving service quality and efficiency, Paul had responded by cutting costs and blaming external factors for declining performance. Any word on Paul's status? Lorna asked. Forced retirement, Wendell replied. The board gave him severance and asked him to step down as CEO. His replacement is trying to restructure, but they're probably 18 months too late. Kevin felt satisfaction that was both professional and personal. Paul Ellison had spent 3 years treating Kevin like dispensable hired help, never imagining that the quiet operations manager was capable of systematic revenge. Now Paul was gone, his company was failing, and his nephew was serving federal prison time for fraud. The irony was that Kevin hadn't needed to do anything unethical or illegal to destroy Hartridge. He'd simply build a better company and let market forces handle the rest. Clients chose Graviton because they received superior service. Employees chose Graviton because they were rewarded for competence rather than family connections. Speaking of restructuring, Noel said, I've been getting calls from Hartridge employees asking about job opportunities. Their HR department is apparently in chaos. Kevin wasn't surprised. Talented employees always recognized sinking ships and looked for alternatives. Graviton had become the preferred destination for logistics professionals who wanted to work for a company that valued merit over politics. Anyone interesting? David Park from their IT department, Rebecca Walsh from vendor relations, Antonio Reeves from client services. All solid performers frustrated by Hartridge's management structure. Kevin considered the possibilities. Graviton was growing rapidly and needed experienced personnel. Hiring the best people from failing competitors was standard business practice, as long as it was done legally and ethically. Set up interviews for next week. Standard salary and equity packages if they meet our qualifications. The meeting continued for another hour, covering operational details, financial projections, and strategic planning for the next quarter. Kevin listened to his team's reports with genuine satisfaction. These people had trusted him enough to leave secure jobs and join an improving startup. Their trust had been rewarded with profit-sharing bonuses, equity participation, and opportunities for advancement based on performance. After the meeting ended, Kevin returned to his office to review client acquisition reports. Graviton was currently negotiating contracts with 6 potential new clients, 4 of whom were former Hartridge accounts. The pattern was always the same. Hartridge would lose a client due to poor service or billing problems. The client would request competitive bids, and Graviton would win the contract by offering better service at competitive prices. His phone buzzed. Richard Ellison, Paul's brother and senior partner at a major law firm downtown. Kevin Renshaw. Kevin, this is Richard Ellison, Paul's brother. I was hoping we could meet to discuss a business matter. Kevin leaned back, curious about what Paul's family wanted to discuss. What kind of business matter? A potential opportunity that might benefit both Graviton and what remains of Hartridge. I prefer to discuss details in person. Kevin suspected this was some settlement offer or non-compete proposal. Paul probably wanted to find a way to stop Graviton's systematic acquisition of Hartridge's clients and employees. I can meet tomorrow afternoon. My office or yours? Would you mind coming to mine? I think the setting might be more conducive to productive conversation. Kevin agreed to the meeting, though he had no intention of accepting any proposal that would limit Graviton's competitive advantages. Hartridge had earned its current problems through years of incompetent management and criminal behavior. Kevin felt no obligation to help them avoid consequences. That evening, Kevin drove to his River North apartment, a modern high-rise with views of downtown Chicago and Lake Michigan. The apartment was furnished with minimalist furniture that reflected his personality. Functional, efficient, and uncluttered by unnecessary complications. Jocelyn had visited once, 3 months earlier, to discuss their divorce settlement. She'd seemed uncomfortable with the sparse decor and lack of personal photographs. It doesn't feel like anyone lives here, she'd said. Kevin preferred it that way. The apartment was a place to sleep and review business reports, not a showcase for domestic happiness or social status. He had no interest in impressing visitors or creating atmosphere of warmth and welcome. His phone rang while he was reviewing Graviton's latest financial statements. Jocelyn, what can I do for you? Kevin answered. I wanted to let you know that I'm moving to Arizona next month. I got a job with a marketing firm in Phoenix. Kevin wasn't surprised. Jocelyn had struggled to find employment in Chicago after their divorce became public knowledge. Her association with the Ellison family name had become a professional liability in the logistics industry. Congratulations. I hope the new job works out well. Kevin, I also wanted to apologize for not supporting you when you were at Hartridge, for not understanding what Dad was doing to you, for choosing family loyalty over what was right. Kevin set down his financial reports and walked to the window overlooking the city. 3 years ago, an apology from Jocelyn might have meant something to him. Now it seemed irrelevant to his current circumstances. I appreciate that, he said, though he wasn't sure if he actually did. Do you think we could have worked things out if I'd handled things differently? Kevin considered the question seriously. Could their marriage have survived if Jocelyn had supported his decision to expose David's criminal behavior? Could they have built a relationship based on shared values rather than family connections and social expectations? I don't know, but it doesn't matter now. We both made our choices. I know. I just wanted you to know that I understand why you did what you did. And I'm proud of what you've built with Graviton. After hanging up, Kevin returned to his financial reports, but found it difficult to concentrate. Jocelyn's apology had stirred up emotions he'd thought were long buried. Not regret about their divorce, but something more complicated. A recognition that their relationship had been doomed from the beginning by incompatible worldviews and divided loyalties. Kevin had wanted a partner who shared his values and supported his ambitions. Jocelyn had wanted a husband who would fit seamlessly into her family's social and business network. Neither had been willing to compromise their fundamental expectations. The next afternoon, Kevin arrived at Richard Ellison's law office exactly on time. The office was designed to impress clients with expensive furniture, prestigious awards, and panoramic views of downtown Chicago. Richard was a successful attorney who'd built his career on corporate mergers and acquisitions. Kevin, thank you for coming. Can I offer you something to drink? Coffee would be fine. Richard's assistant brought coffee and closed the door, leaving them alone in the conference room. Richard was several years older than Paul, with gray hair and confident demeanor of someone who'd spent decades negotiating complex business deals. I'll get straight to the point, Richard said. Hartridge is in serious financial trouble. They're going to file for bankruptcy within 60 days unless they find a way to stabilize operations. Kevin sipped his coffee and waited for Richard to continue. Hartridge's financial problems weren't news to anyone in the logistics industry. The board has authorized me to explore acquisition opportunities. Companies that might be interested in purchasing Hartridge's assets, client relationships, and operational infrastructure. And you think Graviton might be interested? I think Graviton is the only logical buyer. You understand the business, you have relationships with many of Hartridge's former clients, and you have operational expertise to integrate their assets into your existing structure. Kevin set down his coffee cup and studied Richard's expression. This was interesting. Paul's family was essentially offering to sell Hartridge to the man they'd spent 3 years treating as dispensable hired help. What kind of assets are we talking about? Richard opened a folder and spread out financial documents. 3 warehouse facilities, a fleet of delivery vehicles, existing vendor contracts, and a client base worth approximately $12 million in annual revenue. Kevin reviewed the documents carefully. Hartridge's assets were substantial, even after 6 months of declining performance. Acquiring those assets would allow Graviton to expand operations significantly and compete for larger contracts. What's the asking price? $8.5 million. Approximately 70 cents on the dollar based on current market valuations. Kevin did the math quickly. $8.5 million was substantial investment, but it would give Graviton immediate access to regional markets that would otherwise take years to develop. The acquisition would also eliminate Hartridge as a competitor permanently. Why would the board sell to Graviton instead of a larger logistics company with more capital? Richard smiled for the first time since Kevin had arrived. Because you're the only potential buyer who's expressed serious interest. Most major logistics companies view Hartridge as damaged goods due to criminal investigations and negative publicity. Kevin understood. Hartridge's reputation had been permanently tainted by David's prosecution and Paul's forced retirement. Acquiring the company would mean inheriting their legal problems and public relations challenges. What about ongoing liabilities? Criminal investigations, civil lawsuits, regulatory compliance issues. Those would remain with the current corporate entity. The buyer would acquire assets only, not legal liabilities. Kevin stood up and walked to the window overlooking downtown Chicago. 3 years ago, he'd been a middle manager earning modest salary and hoping for eventual promotion within Paul Ellison's company. Now Paul's brother was offering to sell him the entire company for less than its book value. The proposal was tempting, but Kevin needed time to analyze financial implications and strategic benefits. Acquiring Hartridge would accelerate Graviton's growth, but it would also require significant capital investment and integration challenges. I'll need to review the financials with my team and get back to you. Of course. But I should mention that we're hoping to complete the transaction within 30 days. Hartridge's cash flow situation is becoming critical. Kevin thanked Richard for the meeting and drove back to Graviton's office, where he found Lorna reviewing quarterly projections. How did the meeting go? She asked. Kevin briefed her on Richard's acquisition proposal, including asking price and timeline for completing the transaction. Lorna listened carefully, asking questions about asset valuations and integration costs. What do you think? Kevin asked. I think it's poetic justice. Paul Ellison's company being sold to the employee he never thought was good enough to promote. Kevin appreciated the irony, but he was more interested in business implications. Is it a good deal financially? Probably. Hartridge's assets are worth more than $8.5 million, even with their current problems. And eliminating them as a competitor would be worth millions in future revenue. What about integration challenges? Manageable. We've been hiring Hartridge employees for 6 months, so our people already understand their systems and procedures. The biggest challenge would be rebranding their client relationships and upgrading their operational efficiency. Kevin spent the rest of the afternoon analyzing Hartridge's financial statements and asset valuations. The numbers supported Richard's claim that the asking price was reasonable. More importantly, Acquiring Hartridge would give Graviton immediate access to markets and infrastructure that would otherwise take years to develop organically. By 6 p.m., Kevin had made his decision. The Hartridge Board of Directors convened an emergency meeting the next morning at Richard Ellison's law office. Kevin arrived with Lorna and their attorney, prepared to present Graviton's acquisition offer. The board members looked tired and defeated, like people who'd spent months trying to solve problems that had no viable solutions. "Thank you all for coming," Richard said to open the meeting. "As you know, we're here to discuss Graviton Freight Systems' proposal to acquire Hartridge's operational assets." Kevin stood up and distributed copies of Graviton's offer to each board member. The document was concise and straightforward. Graviton would purchase Hartridge's warehouses, vehicles, vendor contracts, and client relationships for $7.2 million cash, with closing scheduled for 30 days from acceptance. $7.2 million. Richard looked surprised. "Yesterday you indicated the asking price was $8.5 million. "Yesterday, I hadn't completed my due diligence review," Kevin replied. "Hartridge's operational efficiency is significantly below industry standards. Their client retention rates have declined, and their vendor contracts include unfavorable terms that will require renegotiation." Kevin opened his laptop and connected it to the conference room's presentation screen. His analysis was thorough and damning. Hartridge's delivery times were 28% slower than Graviton's. Their fuel costs were 18% higher due to inefficient routing. Their warehouse productivity was 31% below industry benchmarks. These operational deficiencies represent significant costs that Graviton would need to address immediately after acquisition, Kevin explained. "Our offer reflects the investment required to bring Hartridge's assets up to competitive standards." The board members reviewed Kevin's analysis with expressions ranging from resignation to frustration. They knew their company had been poorly managed, but seeing the data presented so systematically was obviously uncomfortable. "What about our employees?" asked Barbara Hartwell, the board's longest-serving member. "Would Graviton retain existing staff?" Graviton would evaluate all personnel based on qualifications and performance. "Employees who meet our standards would be offered positions at competitive salary levels. Employees who don't meet our standards would receive severance packages consistent with industry practices." Kevin's answer was diplomatically phrased, but everyone understood what it meant. Hartridge's competent employees would be retained. Their incompetent employees would be terminated. Personnel decisions would be based on merit rather than family connections or office politics. "And what about the Hartridge name?" asked another board member. "Would you maintain the brand or rebrand everything under Graviton?" "The Hartridge brand would be retired," Kevin said without hesitation. "All assets would be rebranded under Graviton's identity." This was the final insult to Paul Ellison's legacy. Not only would his company be sold to the employee he never respected, but his family name would be erased from the business entirely. Hartridge Logistics would cease to exist as anything more than a historical footnote. The board members spent 20 minutes asking questions about transition timelines, employee retention, and asset valuations. Kevin answered everything directly and professionally, providing detailed explanations without revealing any personal satisfaction about acquiring his former employer's company. "We'll need to discuss this privately and get back to you," Richard said finally. "Of course, but I should mention that Graviton's offer expires at 5 p.m. tomorrow. After that, we'll pursue organic growth strategies instead of acquisition." Kevin's deadline was calculated to create urgency without appearing unreasonable. Hartridge's financial situation was deteriorating rapidly, and they couldn't afford to delay difficult decisions while hoping for better alternatives. After leaving the law office, Kevin and Lorna drove back to Graviton's headquarters. Kevin felt calm and focused, the way he always felt when executing carefully planned strategies. Acquiring Hartridge would be satisfying on a personal level, but more importantly, it was the right business decision for Graviton's continued growth. "Do you think they'll accept?" Lorna asked. "They don't have any choice. Hartridge is hemorrhaging money, and we're the only buyer who's made a serious offer. What if they try to negotiate the price higher?" Then we walk away and let them file for bankruptcy. Their assets will be worth even less in a liquidation sale. Kevin's phone rang as they were pulling into Graviton's parking garage. Richard Ellison. Kevin, the board has accepted your offer. We'd like to schedule a closing meeting for next Friday. That works for us. I'll have our attorney prepare the necessary documents. There's one additional request from the board. They'd like assurance that Hartridge employees will be treated fairly during the transition. Kevin understood what Richard was really asking. The board wanted reassurance that Kevin wouldn't use the acquisition as an opportunity for personal revenge against people who'd worked for Paul Ellison. Graviton's personnel decisions will be based entirely on professional qualifications and performance metrics. Personal relationships or past employment history won't be factors in retention decisions. I appreciate that. I'll have our legal team coordinate with yours on the closing documents. After hanging up, Kevin sat in his car for a moment, processing what had just happened. In 18 months, he'd gone from being an overlooked middle manager to owning the company that had employed him. Paul Ellison's empire would soon belong to the man Paul had never considered promoting. Kevin walked into Graviton's office and found his senior management team gathered in the conference room, reviewing client proposals and operational reports. These people had trusted him enough to leave secure jobs and join an improving startup. Their trust had been rewarded with equity participation, performance bonuses, and opportunities for advancement. I have an announcement, Kevin said, closing the conference room door. Graviton has just agreed to acquire Hartridge Logistics. The room erupted in excited conversation as people processed the implications. Miguel asked about technical integration challenges. Janet asked about warehouse consolidation strategies. Miles asked about client transition procedures. Kevin answered their questions methodically, explaining how the acquisition would accelerate Graviton's growth while eliminating their primary competitor. The integration would require careful planning and significant effort, but it would position Graviton as the dominant logistics provider in the Chicago market. What about Paul Ellison? Noel asked. Will he have any ongoing role in the company? Paul Ellison was forced to retire 6 months ago, Kevin replied. He has no connection to Hartridge's current operations and no role in the acquisition. Kevin didn't mention that Paul's retirement had been a direct consequence of the criminal investigation Kevin had initiated. Everyone in the room understood the chronology of events, but Kevin saw no need to emphasize his personal role in Paul's downfall. The meeting continued for another hour as the team discussed integration timelines and operational challenges. Kevin listened to their ideas and assigned responsibilities for different aspects of the acquisition process. These people were committed to Graviton's success, and they would ensure that the Hartridge acquisition was handled professionally and efficiently. That evening, Kevin returned to his apartment and poured himself a glass of wine from a bottle he'd been saving for a special occasion. He stood at his window overlooking downtown Chicago, watching lights come on in office buildings as people worked late. Somewhere in the city, Paul Ellison was probably learning about the acquisition from news reports or family members. Kevin wondered how Paul would react to discovering that his former employee had purchased his company for 70 cents on the dollar. Kevin's phone buzzed with text from an unknown number. Congratulations on the acquisition. You earned it. P. Paul Ellison. Kevin stared at the message for several seconds, trying to decide how to respond. Part of him wanted to ignore it entirely. Part of him wanted to send a reply that would drive home the full extent of Paul's professional humiliation. Instead, Kevin deleted the message without responding. Paul Ellison was no longer relevant to Kevin's future plans. Hartridge was just the first step in building a logistics empire that would eventually dominate markets throughout the Midwest and beyond. 1 month after acquiring Hartridge, Kevin stood in the abandoned warehouse that had once served as the company's flagship facility. The building was empty now, its equipment relocated to Graviton's more efficient facilities, its former employees either hired by Graviton or seeking employment elsewhere. The silence was profound. 3 years ago, this warehouse had buzzed with activity as Kevin worked 18-hour days to transform a failing operation into a profitable division. Now, it was a hollow shell, stripped of everything valuable and scheduled for demolition. Harper Joe, Graviton's legal counsel, stood beside Kevin as they conducted a final walkthrough before turning the building over to demolition contractors. Harper had handled all legal aspects of the Hartridge acquisition, ensuring that every contract was properly transferred and every liability was appropriately addressed. "So what now?" Harper asked, her voice echoing in the empty space. "You won." Kevin looked around the warehouse one final time, remembering the long nights he'd spent here optimizing routing algorithms and negotiating vendor contracts. He'd built something significant in this space, only to watch Paul Ellison take credit for the results and promote less qualified family members over him. "I'm not finished," Kevin said, that he led Harper outside to his SUV, where he opened the rear cargo area to reveal a collection of planning boards, charts, and strategic documents. The materials were organized with military precision, covering market analysis, competitive positioning, and expansion strategies. Harper examined the planning boards with growing amazement. Phase 2, National Integration, was written across the top of the largest board, with detailed timelines and resource allocations for expanding Graviton's operations into 12 additional cities. "Kevin, this is incredible. You're planning to build a national logistics network. The Chicago market was just the beginning. Graviton has the operational expertise and financial resources to compete nationally. We're going to acquire regional logistics companies, integrate their operations, and build the most efficient supply chain network in North America." Kevin pointed to specific elements of his expansion plan. Detroit and Milwaukee would be the first targets, with acquisitions scheduled for the next 18 months. Indianapolis, St. Louis, and Kansas City would follow within 3 years. Eventually, Graviton would have operations in every major metropolitan area between the East Coast and the Rocky Mountains. What about funding? National expansion requires enormous capital investment. Graviton's profitability and growth trajectory will attract institutional investors, private equity firms, pension funds, investment banks. They're looking for companies with proven management teams and scalable business models. Harper studied the financial projections Kevin had prepared. The numbers were aggressive but realistic, based on Graviton's demonstrated ability to integrate acquisitions efficiently and improve operational performance. "You're talking about building a billion-dollar company. I'm talking about building the best logistics company in North America. The revenue will follow from operational excellence." Kevin loaded the planning materials back into his SUV and drove Harper back to Graviton's headquarters. The building that had once housed a struggling startup now buzzed with activity as 87 employees managed operations across 6 states. Graviton's success had attracted talented professionals from throughout the logistics industry, people who wanted to work for a company that rewarded competence and maintained ethical standards. In his office, Kevin reviewed the latest performance reports with satisfaction. Graviton's client retention rate was 99%. Their operational efficiency exceeded industry benchmarks by 35%. Their employee satisfaction scores were the highest in the industry. More importantly, Graviton had achieved these results through merit-based hiring, transparent promotion policies, and rigorous performance standards. No nepotism, no office politics, no tolerance for mediocrity or corruption. Just competent professionals delivering exceptional results for clients. Kevin's phone rang with a call from Richard Ellison, who had become an informal advisor to Graviton after handling the Hartridge acquisition. "Kevin, I wanted to give you an update on Paul's situation." Kevin wasn't particularly interested in Paul's situation, but he listened politely as Richard explained that his brother had been forced to sell his estate to pay legal fees and civil settlements. Paul was now living in a modest condominium and working as a business consultant for small companies. "He asked me to tell you that he respects what you've built with Graviton." Kevin almost laughed. Paul's respect was 3 years too late and completely irrelevant to Kevin's current circumstances. "I appreciate that," Kevin said, though he didn't. He also wanted me to ask if you'd be interested in hiring him as a consultant. His experience with logistics operations might be valuable as you expand nationally. This time Kevin did laugh. The idea of Paul Ellison working for the man he'd spent 3 years treating as hired help was so absurd that Kevin couldn't take it seriously. I don't think that would be a good fit. I understand. But if you change your mind, the offer stands. After hanging up, Kevin returned to his expansion planning documents. Paul Ellison's career was over, but Kevin's was just beginning to reach its full potential. Graviton would become the logistics industry standard, the company that other firms measured themselves against. Kevin opened his desk drawer and removed a single framed document. His original resignation letter from Hartridge, the letter that had started everything. He'd kept it as a reminder of how far he'd traveled and how much he'd accomplished through methodical planning and ruthless execution. The letter represented more than just his departure from Hartridge. It represented his transformation from overlooked employee into successful entrepreneur. From someone who accepted disrespect to someone who commanded respect. From someone who worked for other people's success to someone who built his own empire. Kevin hung the letter on his office wall, where it would remind him daily of the principles that had guided his rise. Competence over connections, merit over politics, results over relationships. These principles had enabled him to destroy Paul Ellison's company and build something better in its place. But destroying Hartridge was just the first chapter in a much longer story. Kevin had bigger plans, higher ambitions, and the operational expertise to achieve them. Graviton would expand nationally, then internationally, until Kevin Renshaw's name was synonymous with logistics excellence throughout the business world. The quiet operations manager who'd been told he was valuable where he was had become the most feared competitor in the Chicago logistics market. Soon he would become the most respected logistics executive in North America. Kevin Renshaw's revenge was complete, but his success was just beginning. 2 years later, Kevin stood in Graviton's new national headquarters, a gleaming 40-story tower in downtown Chicago that housed 1,200 employees across multiple divisions. The company's logo was visible from Lakeshore Drive, a symbol of the logistics empire he'd built through methodical planning and relentless execution. Graviton now operated in 18 cities, with annual revenues exceeding $200 million and plans for international expansion already underway. The company's success had made Kevin one of Chicago's most prominent business leaders, regularly featured in industry publications and business journals. But Kevin's greatest satisfaction came from the company culture he created. Graviton's core values were displayed prominently in every office. Earned respect, transparent leadership, no nepotism, no forgiveness for betrayal. These weren't just slogans, but operational principles that guided every hiring decision, every promotion, and every client relationship. Kevin's office occupied the building's top floor, with panoramic views of downtown Chicago and Lake Michigan. The office was furnished with modern, efficient furniture that reflected his personality. Functional, uncluttered, and focused on results rather than appearances. On the wall behind his desk, in a place where every visitor would see it, hung a single framed document, the letter that had started everything. Kevin's resignation from Hartridge had become a symbol of what was possible when competent people refused to accept disrespect and mediocrity. Jocelyn had remarried and was living in Phoenix, where she managed marketing for a small technology company. Paul Ellison had suffered a heart attack 6 months earlier and was now permanently retired. Devitt had been released from federal prison after serving 18 months and was working as a warehouse supervisor for a small shipping company in Wisconsin. Their fates no longer mattered to Kevin. They had chosen to build their success on nepotism and corruption, and they had suffered the inevitable consequences. Kevin had chosen to build his success on competence and integrity, and he had been rewarded accordingly. Kevin turned away from his window and walked to his desk, where the latest expansion reports awaited his review. Graviton was negotiating acquisitions in Denver, Atlanta, and Phoenix, with plans to establish European operations within the next 18 months. The transformation that had begun with a single resignation letter had evolved into something much larger and more significant. Kevin Renshaw had not only destroyed his former employer's company, but had built an empire that would endure for decades to come. And he was just getting started.